Today, we will be taking a look at the issues currently facing project implementation for secondary education in developing countries and explore the gap that exists in the institutional understanding of these problems. Drawing from the expansive toolkit we have developed throughout the semester, Swidler and Watkins' methodology will be applied to a case study within Tanzania before comparing the insight we glean to the current project guidelines put forth by policy-making institutions like the Tanzanian Educational Authority. For the scope of my study today, I will focus my case on a project that hoped to address a specific problem within secondary education implementation: gender inequity in Tanzania. Tanzania proves to be an apt microcosm for the study of secondary education deficiencies for its particularly low transition rate, or the percentage of primary school students moving on to secondary school. At just 36% of all primary school students, Tanzania's transition rate is one of the lowest in the world. We will begin with Machimu and Minde's pilot study in the secondary education system in the matrilineal village of Luguru, Tanzania. In Luguru, as a matrilineal society, women hold very influential positions relative to other family members, especially with respect to the passing down of property. However, despite this advanced role, a clear gender gap exists in the secondary school participation and performance of children, and unfortunately, the majority of secondary school pilot programs in the region have failed to bridge this gap. The secondary school gender gap is a problem that has morphed, but not disappeared, despite heightened education investment in recent years. The animation that is now rolling through reveals the ratio of girls to boys in secondary education throughout the world, with blue countries representing highly unfavorable conditions for girls and orange showing the opposite. What becomes abundantly clear is that as a result of political and economic trauma, and a number of other microcosmic factors, the gender gap is a critical issue that desperately needs to be addressed at all stages of the development spectrum. Machimu and Minde found in their study of Luguru's secondary school system that in spite of their role in the matrilineal society, girls experienced higher dropout rates, greater chances of failing exams, and a much larger incidence of lack of payment of school fees. Observing the demographic makeup of the Luguru population described in the study's background section, a Swidler and Watkins-esque stratification of society becomes apparent. While for boys, a fairly clear organizational structure exists, stemming from the children, to the teachers at school, and finally to the educational project implementers, a much more disjointed linkage is present for the girls, despite their relatively more important filial role. Upon closer look at the residencies of students, due to the rural nature of the Luguru township, secondary schools generally provide hostel accommodations for the children. For the Luguru girls, however, these accommodations are not nearly suitable enough for boarding, especially in light of the conservative Christian and Muslim households that inhabit the area. This adds an interstitial barrier between the Luguru girls and their schooling by way of the long-distance transportation, which is not catered for by the school. Interviews conducted by the Department of Community and Rural Development at nearby Moshi University reveal that many Luguru girls felt at risk of sexual harassment on their way home, or in the meager housing provided. Additionally, another obstacle that alters the stratification for girls involves the family dynamic at home. In Luguru, Machimu and Minde also observed parental responsibility for paying school fees, and found that in spite of the tendency for mothers to be in control of finances, due to the matrilineal societal structure, it was the majority of fathers who actually held jurisdiction over the payment of school fees. Thus, a Luguru girl's education development is often left in the hands of a father who is more likely to believe in the continuation of a system where a girl is kept home to work or married into another family at a young age. Clearly, leveraging Swidler and Watkins' stratification model to reveal the underlying social dynamics in the Luguru village reveals some key flaws in the implementation of secondary education projects in the region. While Machimu and Minde don't delve into the intricacies of the relationship between the project implementer and the school administration itself, the stratification analysis is undoubtedly helpful in isolating some of the more important considerations that need to be incorporated in order to ensure that the gender gap does not grow further. Specifically, we can point to 1. The assurance that adequate housing accommodations are made available to both sexes in rural areas, and 2. The offering of fee supplements or discounts to incentivize fathers to allow their daughters to attend school over labor or marriage. Now let's take a brief look at how the institutional organizations that fund these sorts of secondary education initiatives propose to mitigate the gender gap. In a seemingly exhaustive 150-page policy brief, the Tanzanian Educational Authority, along with the Ministry of Education and Vocational Training, published an education sector analysis to illustrate the broad compartments in which education implementers and donors can improve. Of the nearly 30 points referenced, the 10 shown here were most prevalent and enactable on the part of the researchers like Machimu and Mindy. Interestingly, this list does call for accommodations to be made for girls and rural Tanzanian children, but does not address the unique situations present for the intersection of those two groups, rural girls. Another interesting insight is a lack of mention of the financial burden that is placed upon households to pay school fees, and the associated cultural considerations that are overlooked, like matrilineal villages. In conclusion, while of course observing a specific case study may in turn yield more specific insight into the problems plaguing secondary education implementations, what cannot be doubted is the effectiveness of Swidler and Watkins' stratification methodology. Without their analysis, we would not have been able to pinpoint the specific issues that affect portions of the project's intended beneficiaries and in turn offer targeted solutions to help them succeed.